Jack's back. That's right, Labor crowd favourite Jack Milroy is back from his sabbatical in the US state of Canada for today's FontCast. Hello, I'm Becher Townshend and welcome to FontCast, Tasmania's top-rating politics podcast. Hello, Jack.
Hello, and as in hockey and all things, the US will lose against Canada, so let's just leave it there.
Okay, well, tell us, what have you been up to in the new world and what brings you home?
It's lovely to be back in this beautiful weather that we've been having. Spent a bit of time in the US doing some work last year. No, not on that. And then spent a few months in Canada seeing friends and family and doing a bit of work.
You didn't run into Rebecca White on the campaign trail in Pennsylvania?
I didn't happen to run into Rebecca, no.
Okay. And of course, joining me today for today's dive into the ever-exciting world of Tasmanian politics is Brad Stansfield.
Hello, Beach. Hello, Jack. Great to have you back. Hello, David.
Morning.
Hello, Sam.
And of course, the Mercury's chief political reporter, David Killick.
I haven't gone anywhere. I've just been here. I talk about it a lot, but
yeah,
I never leave.
I think you've been in the
trenches.
trenches.
Hotel California, Hobart Edition.
You've been in the trenches all week, though, David. Long week.
It feels
politics.
like it.
Yeah.
What's this David thing?
David.
There was a typo
Yeah.
that drew the attention of some folk where I was referred to as David.
Oh, David. Well,
good.
Today's menu is dominated by the Premier's State of the State address, where he dropped a few bombshells, including potential privatisation of some state-owned GBEs. But first, there's a small matter of the ever-continuing Spirit of Tasmania saga and the latest revelations that, believe it or not, the Tasmanian government considered leasing out the vessel to house Ukrainian refugees. Brad.
Sorry, I just got distracted there by David showing me the screenshot of his new name.
David.
David.
I'm rolling with it.
Look, this really was like an episode of Utopia, the thick of it, anything else, all rolled into one.
Fawlty Towers.
Fawlty Towers, exactly. I mean, I've heard whispers of this doing the rounds for a little while now, but full credit to Josh Agnew over at our friends at Pulse for standing this story up.
Yep.
A scoop of the year, in my view. It's only early in the year, of course, still time to come home with a wet sail, David. But I think,
best,
I think a really good get from him. And look, as for the idea itself, as I said, absolute batshit crazy. I actually can't believe it got past first base, let alone having a minister and presumably the Premier agree that it was a good idea that should be proceeded with. Absolutely mind-boggling, I've got to say.
Yeah, I've got to agree. It really points to a bit of a tin air on this one. And by any measure, the reputational damage that this has done internationally to Tasmania is quite breathtaking, with the BBC, amongst others, leading the charge. Anyhow.
You sent me an article last night, Beach, from some sort of maritime blog, which was very amusing.
I did, where it was talking about
Daily Cargo News.
Well, it was up there with the Daily Cargo News, and it sort of talked about the three biggest balls ups of the year, or biggest stuff ups of the year, as it were. And guess which one took the Crown Prize?
Bad Maritime, if anyone's interested.
Maritime's a nice little opinion piece about the three. I think they're all state-owned ferries, all in various states of mismanagement. The good news about our Spirits is I think we actually get them at some point. If you're in New Zealand, you buy boats, you don't even get them. Anyhow, David, what's your take on this?
They got second, did they?
Yes.
No, it's very interesting because, I mean, it's one of those stories, and I reflected on this when we were at the Doge announcement. You know, for people who have a lot of advisors, you know, sometimes I question who's taking a step back and saying, hang on about this. I had a quick look on, I think it was Thursday or Friday, we had the press conference with the Premier where he didn't rule out, which is always, you know, you ask the questions, you say, this batshit crazy idea, can you rule that out? Can you just, and we'll get on with our lives. Yeah. But no, you know, we got it, I think it ran for 3 days, which a former colleague of yours used to describe as a test match. You know, it's a good one you can get 3 days out of. Yeah. But you know, a cursory Google brought up, you know, the Red Cross saying this is a terrible idea. Yeah. Don't do this. It is an abuse of human rights. So, you know, if I can find that in 15 seconds, I suspect the advisors suite in Murray Street could probably do the same.
Well,
it just didn't seem very well thought through. I know we'll talk about Doge later.
Well, yeah, before we get that, I think you'll find this test might run into a bit of extra time, but more of that later. Anyhow, Jack, what do you make of it all?
Oh, I mean, look, we should do everything we can to support Ukrainians fleeing the war, but putting them on a boat that is not fitted out, floating in the colds of Scotland, it's also not a state government responsibility to be dealing with this stuff. Like this is a foreign affairs issue. It's batshit. It's just weird. And it looks like they're trying to make a buck out of essentially leasing something out to people in distress because they can manage the project.
Might be able to make $1 out of the misery of others. Anyhow, okay, you'll be relieved to hear, all of you will be relieved to hear that your political judgment, unlike the government's on this one, is correct. I've got in my hot little hands here a snap survey our good friends at Enterprise Marketing and Research Services have undertaken, and they have asked the question. Here it is. Here it is.
The camera's over there.
Yes,
can you read
there
it?
we go. Okay, there it is. It's rate the support for leasing the Spirit of Tasmania ferries, and the question asked, the state government has revealed they considered leasing out the Spirit of Tasmania to the Scottish government to house Ukrainian refugees. To what extent do you support or oppose this idea? Okay, so it's a pretty straight up and down question. Those in the strongly support category, 14%. Those who somewhat support, 19%. Okay, so this is a sample size of about 473 statewide. About, yes, exactly. It's weighted by age, gender, region, electorate and education, and it has a margin of error of about 4.5%. So it's 95% confidence. So in terms of broad numbers, it's pretty good. So overall, that's a total support for the proposition of 33%.
Okay, it's probably better than I might have thought.
Yep, okay. Yeah. But then we asked the question where some people weren't necessarily supportive of it. So those who were somewhat against, 16%. Mm-hmm. Those who were strongly against, 32%, making for a total against of 49%. So
Sam, you've written that down? You got the
in my
49.
in my brain.
So what was it? What was total against, Pete?
49% again, 33% for, and 18%, which is an interesting number. 18% were neutral.
So 49 to 33.
Unwinnable. Yep.
Okay.
Now we break down the figures a little bit more, and it always gets a little bit hairy when you've only got a smaller sample size, but you'll be not surprised probably to understand that residents of Hobart and the southeast were more likely to be neutral, about 26%, while those on the west and northwest, in fact, 71% were more likely to be against this.
So 71% in
the north, well, the
where
west,
the boats eventually need to turn up to.
Where the boat's going to sit, and those
Premier's electorate,
yeah, that'd be it. Yeah, those aged 70 or older, that's 62% were more likely to be against this. So the older you are, the closer to where the boats are going to be berthed, the more you think this one's got whiskers on it.
We're all shocked.
So there you go.
Shocked.
So Captain Renault is shocked, as you say. Anyhow, Brad, what else do we know about the Spirits at this point?
Look, I mean, just a bit more on this. I've been trying to find out what exactly is going on here.
I think you've been doing a bit of investigation.
I'm not a journalist.
You're not a journalist.
I'm not a journalist, Beach, but I've been tapping a few sources, as the saying goes, and just trying to get to the bottom of this saga. And look, from what I can understand, and this might even be a bit of an exclusive, Beach. I don't know.
Don't we have Sam do something? Don't we have a bell or something?
David may be able to confirm some of this, I suspect.
Yeah.
But
I'll put it in post.
Air horn.
Thank you.
Really?
From what I can gather, the TT line they had a broker. They employed their regular broker.
Yep.
That broker was not negotiating with the Scottish government, and I think the Scottish government's confirmed that on the record. That broker was negotiating with another broker for the lease of the ship. Now, that broker, I understand, goes by the name of Landry and Kling, a major international ship broker.
Yep.
And as I understand it, Landry and Kling made the offer or the proposal that they would take the ship to house Ukrainian refugees, but at no point had that deal actually been done with the Scottish government about that. So it's a bit like when you buy a house sometimes and there's a broker at both ends of the equation. In this particular case, there was actually no confirmed deal for the Ukrainian refugee part of the equation.
Where were they planning on getting the refugees from?
Well, I think
were there any?
From Ukraine?
well, that's
How were they like?
that's the question. The concerning part about all this is, as I understand it, the minister, that would be Minister Abetz, and the broader government thought that they were negotiating with the Scottish government. They thought there was a real offer and deal
So they thought it was
on the table, and they absolutely intended to sign that deal right up until...
They realised it was imaginary? Or-
Yeah, I think the Scottish government made their position clear. I think it was on the weekend, David, last weekend. The Scottish government put some comments out. Yeah.
It's not the Scottish government. It's two boat brokers in a trench coat.
I think is a not unreasonable...
It's like every time we go to a shipyard, they see us coming.
Are you from
We're going to need
Tasmania?
another 80 mil.
I've been reading Baird Maritime.
So were they pranked or something?
Well, no, they weren't pranked, but I think there was... it was never as real or as solid as the Tasmanian government here
Thought it was.
Now, there's even questions about, and I think the minister in Parliament, maybe yesterday, David, made a statement that there was a firm offer.
Yeah, there was quite a degree of specificity. I knew I'd bugger that up at the government end. The Premier was talking about the quantum of millions that we were going to make out of
$30 million, apparently. I'm not even sure there was indeed a firm offer from the broker, because the broker had yet to secure a buyer at his end, so to speak. Anyway, I noticed yesterday also, it was reported in one of the papers.
In the Examiner today.
In today's paper, so it happened 3 days ago. Okay.
It was online, yes.
Mr. Ferguson, so the former minister, was lamenting his involvement in the TT line debate. And he said, and I quote, "Ministers have to be sceptical about the advice we receive." I think we've been saying that here for quite some time.
We have.
And I just wonder whether the new minister, Minister Abetz, has learned that lesson. How sceptical was he of the advice he was getting from TT Line about this apparently imaginary Ukrainian proposal that was being put forward?
The other thing, did nobody at any point just say, hey, they're going to use the headline floating refugee camp? I mean, that was what immediately, that was what Labor went with. Did nobody at any point say, this is going to be a terrible look for our prized, brand new ferry asset to be used, against the advice of the Red Cross to house refugees?
I think if they'd done a bit of a Google search, they could have put the words Ukrainian refugee and ship in the system.
David earlier mentioned Google. Google.
They have it on computers now.
And that would have.
Yeah.
But let's also not walk past how cynical it is to try to solve a problem of a boat that isn't finished and you can't bring here, and you've got a war with people fleeing for their lives, and a new model of humanitarian assistance where those people pay you, or someone pays you to give the assistance. Like, what are we doing here?
Well,
no, I think that's a legitimate view.
Yeah,
certainly a view held by some of the left. You're one of your left-wing colleagues espoused that view to us the other day.
and I can certainly understand they have a huge problem with housing in Europe. Ukrainian refugees, the reality is, and I know this from the time I spend in Ireland, where they're all coming over from the UK, and they're camping on the canals in the middle of Dublin. It's a huge problem, so they're definitely looking at it.
But this could be a heritage thing. We could use the prisons full. We could, go back to the future and have a floating prison hull in the Derwent.
Anyhow,
before we move on, just one other point. I just want to check with this, David. Is it right? I read again, somewhere, might have been your publication.
To be right.
Eric, just make sure, wait till I say it first. But allegedly, Minister Abetz said they're now going to consider whether or not they lease out Spirit 5. Is that right?
I did hear that. Yeah. So there's another boat coming down
if they're not
the slipway.
Well,
yeah,
I've got to say, it's quite clear. This leopard does not change its spots, even when you shuffle the deck chairs.
TT line leopard.
Yeah, the TT line leopard. Even when you shuffle the deck chairs, I've banged on about gas. Latest thing is, to do gas we need a whole of port solution. So we've still got this continual excuse making for not doing something.
They won't be able to get under the bridge next. Is there a bridge somewhere that they won't be able to get under?
No, they won't be able to turn them. Won't be able to turn them in East Devonport. All right, let's move on to the main course, the Premier's State of the State speech. Dave, can you take us through it?
Yeah, the State of the State's always a bit of a random affair. Sometimes you can turn up and a new stadium's announced. Other time it's someone going through the platitudes. This one was actually pretty meaty. Historically, I reckon we're about 1 from 4 or 5. You get a good announcement in it. So the Premier outlined a range of reforms. Obviously, we knew about the desire to right-size the public service and the hiring freeze.
First revealed here, the term right-size, David, in the Premier when he was sitting where Jack is in that little interview.
So that was all re-announced and locked in, and we've got a lot more detail about that this week. There was also, and it's evolved over a couple of days, but the initial offering seemed to be the privatisation of 3 or 4 GBEs, the leasing, the establishment of a future fund with that money to offset the debt.
The sustainable pathway to surplus future fund.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sustainable pathway.
After 11 years.
Yeah.
That's it.
I'm sorry, but
sorry, no, it's good.
It was a bit of a mouthful,
my train of thought never very well on the tracks is well and truly derailed. So there was that. There's a bunch of red tape. There's all this mysterious red tape coming from somewhere that, and I actually did.
Someone remarked, and perhaps a bit unfairly, that they saw on social media the Premier opened a bookcase. Is that right?
I'm not. I didn't actually see that myself. I noticed Jane Howlett, resplendent in red, held a press conference yesterday about the cutting red tape. And look, it is a thing. I scoffed at. I rang someone and said, Premier said you need 37 licences to open a cafe in Hobart. Yeah. 56 I got to. It was actually, I went in and I reckon he's having a land. And by ticking all the right boxes, I went out of my way to
How many cafes?
There was a lot, and it was interesting. There are a lot of there's a lot of council compliance, a lot of federal compliance. State government actually isn't as bad as the anyway. Red tape and privatisations. The privatisations idea has expanded out has been refined over the last couple of days, and it's now seems to be fairly clear to everyone that all of the GBEs are on the table. The Premier said as much, except for hydro. So. I sort of was down at Parliament yesterday and wandered through and knocked on a few doors. I'm not sure it's a goer. I'm not sure the crossbench is all that excited about it, but
I think
time will tell.
I think your front page today, Dave, would indicate it's over before it began.
The word doomed is fairly strong.
Come to that, I don't think that's quite right. But
you've got to tell it to sell it. So, Brad, no doubt you've got a strong view on this one. What's your thoughts?
Well, I was glad to finally see some action on the budget front, which, as you probably know, I've been banging on about for quite some time. It was just not sustainable for them to keep on living in this sort of la-la land of nothing was required to be done. So I'm glad that they've finally bitten that bullet. I agree with what I assume was your editorial, or parts of it yesterday, David, where the Mercury editorial made the point that it has changed the narrative. It's changed the political landscape very considerably now. Prior to this, the government was, I think we'd all agree, dying a death of 1,000 cuts from various things that particularly hit minority governments. Yep. Now that's all been turned up on its head. There's a whole new ball game in town. They are taking action on the budget. Whether or not any of these privatisations actually happen, I think is probably slightly a moot point. The fact is the government is taking a serious look at what can be done to fix the budget and has changed that narrative. So I think that's good. And I'd watched broadcast yesterday at Question Time. I wasn't there, so the dynamics might have been different. But watching it, I haven't seen the Premier with such vim and vigour in question time for a long, long time. In fact, it reminded me, if you'd watched it, Beach, I suspect would have reminded you of Bacon, Lennon versus Baby Hodgman, Baby Rockcliffe, vis-a-vis the Premier talking about that here. It was a very, very confident performance yesterday.
All right, well, there's two main aspects, the so-called Dodge unit and the privatisations. Let's start with Dodge. Jack, as mentioned, you're the honorary American here. What do you make of this move?
Well, not, but thank you.
Shunned.
No. Shamed. Sorry, Jack.
The Premier's announced a wish version of Doge, the kind of Timu Ipu, or whatever they're calling it.
It sounds like a union, EPU.
Yeah. Look, I mean, if they're talking about, right-sizing the public service, and I think I saw 6% or something like that reduction, it's about 2,500 jobs.
Yep.
If there were 2,500 resource jobs on the chopping block in this state, everyone around this table and in this state would be up in arms. That's a huge amount of money to pull out of the Tasmanian economy, a huge amount of demand that will be reduced. Business is not going to do well without 2,500 additional public servants spending in their cafes.
Bring it on.
Well, I mean, we can find out. And
but isn't the point, sorry to interrupt you, but Guy was talking about there being 6% more in the last 12 months. Well, the world didn't end 12 months ago when those jobs didn't exist.
Yeah, how did they get?
How do they get?
Yeah,
they're like red tape. They just appear.
And is the government are they going to put their EPU unit onto their enormous bloated communications team in government? Are they going to look at their expanding staffer ranks, or is this just going to be people who provide services to people in the community who need them? I think that this is a great opportunity for the Labor Party. We have seen in the US the Doge concept started popular. It's now underwater, 42.41 in the latest YouGov. It's dropped 6 points in the last week. I don't think this is a political winner, as much a political winner as the government might think it is. It's all fine when it's in theory, as it was in the US. It's very different when they start naming who's going to lose their job, and that person goes on the news. And so I'd expect a significant pushback campaign from the public sector unions on this. And, I think this will be a fight if they want it. But, I also have to think, will this be like local government reform? Will this be like pokies reform? This privatisation stuff, this Doge stuff, are they actually going to follow through on this? Or will this just be another kind of slow, subtle, back down flip-flop?
Well, time will tell, really, won't it? Dave, what do you make of it all?
Yeah, look, it's interesting. I think, to pick up on the point Jack's made, I think that you send a message to your workforce. We're struggling to attract people in certain sectors of our workforce, and I think to a degree this level of uncertainty, where you're talking about cutbacks, you're talking about efficiency units which haven't worked particularly well yet overseas. You send a message to people who might be wanting to come to work here that the public service may not be as secure, may not be as stable, may not be as attractive. That's fine for these theoretical people that you don't want there, but we also want doctors and nurses and teachers and allied health professionals, police, ambulance officers. They read the news too, they see this sort of thing. And I think, unfortunately, it sends a message. The other thing, and I raised this point with Guy Barnett at his press conference, we already have a public sector that's full of people who know exactly where the inefficiencies lie. You have a coffee with any public servant that and they'll tell you exactly. I think, perhaps a more tailored approach might have been to go to the workforce first and say, hey guys, we're trying to save some money. Can you help us? You're at the coalface every day. Some places offer bounties, where they say, right, if you identify some savings, you can trouser a bonus. I just think that the top-down consultant, expert, advisor, God model, we don't have an Elon Musk. I mean, anyone got any thoughts we get Walshy in? Things could get pretty loose. I don't know who you appoint to that. They come in cold. They don't know the ground. We're seeing it go badly. Bernie. Over Spoonie. Great. Perfect.
Has he got a black T-shirt?
I just think we could have, every public servant's got a story to tell about their workplace. So I would have tapped into that first because they're there and it's free.
All right, Brad, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I'm going to surprise you and have completely different thoughts to Jack and to David.
What a shock!
Well, frankly, I do not get the quite, I would say, over the top reaction from some people about this. You and I, we run a business or two.
Correct. Yep.
And the first thing we know is to make sure your business stays profitable, doesn't lose money, is to cut out any spending you do not need to be doing.
Yep.
It makes perfect sense for the government to be doing the same thing and to be looking through your business model and saying, do we really need to be spending this money to deliver the services that Tasmanians want? If the answer is no, then out the door it should go.
Maybe the Doge should get rid of the people who should have been asking that question. Like we have ministers responsible for this sort of thing. We have department secretaries. If they're not doing that...
Well, let me tell you a story. I'll do a Jeremy from Parliament yesterday. I remember when we first came to government in 2014, we had a much vaunted promise to abolish the Department of Infrastructure, Energy and Resources and the Department of Economic Development, and to merge them both into a new department, much more streamlined and efficient, Department of State Growth. Now, unfortunately, the outcome of that was we just ended up with two departments being merged into one, and one department that was twice as big as it should have been.
Yep.
And the reason that happened, and I'm very clear on this in hindsight, is because we let the department themselves tell us how to do it. There was zero savings. You're not going to recommend their mate lose his job or that there'd be... And so it absolutely didn't work. If you actually want to have savings, you've got to have someone come in from outside who can make those decisions without being influenced by pre-existing understandings and relationships. Just one last point, and maybe you were going to come to this, Jack, but Mr. Winter's been very quiet on the Doge, and I suspect the reason for that is that Mr. Winter's much vaunted 10-point plan to fix the budget, which was launched last year and hasn't been spoken about since. Point number 7, I quote, establish a review and evaluation unit in Treasury so failed programs can be identified and ended. How's that different to what Guy announced?
Pre-Doge.
Same thing, different name.
All right. Well, listen, I got to say on this one, Brad, I do agree with you. Look, I accept in Tasmania we're rural and regionally diverse, and so therefore to deliver services we can't deliver them as efficiently as other states. There's no doubt about that. We're a smaller state, but if you have a Department of Health, you still need a secretary. You still need all that infrastructure.
You need associate secretaries.
Well, that's
and
the question.
Of deputy secretaries and assistant secretaries.
And therein lies the issue, right? The issue is that the public service in Tasmania outwardly looking in has grown like Topsy, okay? And it appears to have grown without many checks and balances, and we can have a debate about whose fault that is. The long and the short of it, what needs to occur is a scrutiny of the sector, line by line, department by department, function by function, to get an understanding of whether it works or whether it doesn't work, and at least then make some informed decisions about the size of the bureaucracy. There's no doubt in my head it's grown significantly in recent times. Do we need it? Is it still delivering services efficiently? That's the issue that needs to be examined with this unit. And I get your point, Dave. If there's some efficiencies there that people can suggest as a way of improving things, then go for it. We need every bit of help we can on this.
Do you think this unit, though, is going to apply the same lens when they're looking at SES roles that they'll apply to a teacher's aide or to an orderly in a hospital?
Well, to be blunt, right?
I'm sceptical.
Okay, well, to be blunt, and I can talk a little bit about local government reform. The main driver. Here we go. Yeah. Well, the main driver behind local government reform was, if you look at Hobart, you've got Hobart City Council, you've got the Glenorchy City Council, you've got Clarence Council, you've got the Kingborough Council, you've even got the Brighton Council. 5 councils with 5 general managers on 300,000 plus a year. So what's that? 3 5s, 15. That's $1.5 million a year. So if you create one giant council, you reduce the amount of expenditure on your general managers to 300,000 plus. They probably need 2 IC or something like that. The point being, obviously they should look at the senior ranks of the state service. I mean, the SES level of the service has grown and grown significantly. I'm not suggesting that we don't do a proper root and branch review.
Literally, what is Associate Secretary?
Has appeared.
It's new.
Yeah,
it didn't exist a year ago.
It's a new title. It's appeared because...
Apparently it's between Secretary and Deputy Secretary.
Yeah. So we've got these new mega departments with mega bureaucracies. So there's no question the entirety of the public sector should be looked at, and that is why you do need an outsider looking at it, or an outside group who can come in with a new lens and have a look at it.
One last point on that before we move on, and I don't want to hog the mic, but one of the biggest issues that we have as a business, and I know other businesses have in Tasmania, because Tasmania is so small, is that the biggest competitor to us getting good employees is the state service.
Yes, that's correct.
And guess
absolutely
what?
Correct.
Because they're funded by the taxpayer, they pay more.
Yeah. And
that's the problem.
We're priced out of the market on that, and we have been for many years. There's no doubt about that. Anyhow, let's get on to the next exciting issue in the Premier's State of the State. What about the proposed privatisations? Killer, what are you making of all this? You're talking about an emerging debate.
Yeah, well, I mean, at the moment Brandon did the numbers yesterday, and I just don't think the numbers are there for this reform as it stands.
Yep.
Asterisk. That's today, and that's based on, there's a lot of scepticism. There's a lot of sentimental attachment to some of these assets. I'm not sure that perhaps the MAOB enjoys the same level of patriotic Tasmanian fervour as TT Line, but there's a lot of businesses there that rightly we should question whether they're best in government ownership. However, the Labor Party is vehemently opposed, the Greens are vehemently opposed, David O'Byrne and Craig Garland are opposed in principle, but we'll see what comes out of this. Christy Johnson's opposed. The two former Lambies are supporting the government, and Andrew Jenner is against. I guess the issue here is, and the point that Labor's making, is that privatisations so often don't work when you add the current financial setup and the modest profits that most of these deliver and the dividends they pay to government. You had a profit motive on top of that. You're looking at services. I mean, Metro, for example. Does anyone really believe that prices won't go up?
But will my bus turn up on time?
Probably also not.
Couldn't be any worse.
That was Andrew Jenner's point. What are we going to get for this business? Is it worth the
Mr.
government
Jenner ever catch the Metro? Come on.
Control of the government, of that asset. So, it's a debate that's going to evolve. At this stage, I think Parliament, at best, could be described as lukewarm on the idea, but, probably more accurately, if they had a vote today, it wouldn't get up. So it's a very steep hill. They're going to have to push this one up for many of the assets.
Speaking of lukewarm response, I suspect my psychic powers are saying that that's where you sit, Jack. What's your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think we had an era in this country in the 90s and early 2000s when there was some public support for privatisations, and it happened in New South Wales and Victoria and in WA and other states. I think that the public has well and truly turned against that now. We are in a different era. You've seen that in South Australia and in Victoria, governments have brought previously privatised assets back into public hands with massive public support. I think this will be a political loser for the government. I think it will drag out, and I don't think they'll win, and I think it will be yet another battle scar that they'll have. I think a broader point, because it goes into the previous discussion around the size of the public service too, is there's clearly an issue in this state where the economy is too reliant on the public sector.
That's correct.
But the way to fix that, in my view, is not to just kind of pretend that you've got more private sector involvement by sacking a few public sector workers. Like, we need to be bringing new industries here. We need to be building enough housing in the cities that young people can come here, start businesses, we can grow new industries and expand our tax base. So this feels to me like just a shortcut, sugar hit to the budget bottom line so they can get through another year. It doesn't feel like a long-term economic strategy that's aimed at really growing the economy down here. Would you though? I mean, and I agree with what you say, but look at the MAOB, for example, and this is the classic case. We've got the government is in the business of providing third-party personal injury insurance, which is all fine and good. There's $2 billion sitting there. At 5%, what's that? That's $40-50 million a year we could be spending into health. We could take that. We could reduce our debt by that amount. I guess there's a debate about whether we think on that. I think that's a very marginal business for the government to be in. I see the good arguments. We don't want our rego going up, but can we afford, when debt's pushing up towards $10 billion, can we afford to have an asset that's sitting on a $2 billion cash reserve that's
not really doing anything for the people of Tasmania.
One of the challenges you're going to have with the MIAB is it in part subsidises the operation of the health system in Tasmania, and it also in part subsidises the operation of the police through providing police officers as well as care for injured people. So you're going to have, to a certain degree, you're going to have to unscramble the egg as well. But I think...
And the government has said any proceeds from the sales will go to debt. They haven't said they'll go to the health system or to fund.
Well, I guess the interest on the debt, the not paying the interest on the debt goes into the health system.
Tough political argument to make, I think, when we're talking about costs.
That's the steep push they've got to get this through. Yeah.
We've had, $500 million blowout in health already. So, in a year. I mean, it's just... that's the real politic of this situation is we've got a lot of money that's being spent and we've got to pay for it somehow. Brad?
Well, I've been talking about this option should be on the table for quite some time. Yep. As people know, I'm glad it is. It has to be, the conversation has to be had. This has to be examined. In my view, it makes no sense for the government to run a shipping company. Yep. And I defy anyone, not just in this room, but anyone to tell me in the street an argument as to how they are doing a good job, and it should continue to be done by them.
Well, if they proposed to start one now, we'd all be laughing, wouldn't we? I suppose
exactly.
That's the lens you can look through.
Yeah.
So that's a clear example. I mean, the MIB, I think, is another clear example. I mean, the government should not be running
just because they've done so well.
I mean, I've always argued that the funds from many of these sales should go into paying down, offsetting the superannuation debt.
Yep.
Labor's superannuation debt, $1.5 billion, they're pissing against the wall, which is about $400 million a year off the budget bottom line. If you could offset some of that with sale of assets, then you could get more money into recurrent spending on health, education, etc., etc. As I understand it, the Sensible Pathway to Surplus Future Fund is a similar concept to that. The money will go into paying down debt or offsetting the debt, and then the interest saved, I would use it on the super, but the interest saved is used for recurrent spending. So I think it's absolutely worth looking at. I don't agree with you, David, that the numbers aren't there. On face value, yes, and Labor's never going to vote for it, either of the Greens, but I'm not sure that some of those other people can't be convinced, persuaded
yep.
that perhaps one or two of these are worth proceeding with. We shall see. But I would make the point, whatever they're talking about this, the government is talking about how they actually want to fix the budget and take action on it, and I don't see anyone else with any other sensible or any other ideas, basically, full stop, on the table. My last point, I'm a little bit bemused that my good friend Mr. Estlake has been appointed to do this job, given in his report he recommended against it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Saul jumps on this one, I've got to say. For me, though, it is a bit like the size of the public sector. Again, you've really got to look at these GBEs and ask, why have we got these GBEs and what are they doing for us? And I think the one thing that the whole Spirits fiasco combined with Tasports has demonstrated, we own these institutions because there's a greater good for Tasmania as part of them. Nobody, particularly me, could get beyond the proposition, we have two boats. From my point of view, even if they make no money, if they bring lots of tourism and they allow a lot of exports from Tasmania, happy days. That's all I want them to do, and I'm happy for them to do that. But what we have seen in this circumstance is these GBEs have let the state down considerably. I was talking about the reputational damage. And consistently, and continue to do it. They haven't changed. We've still got the same problems. I mean, frankly, it's an embarrassment to think government thought they were negotiating with a sovereign state, and they weren't. They were negotiating with a, I'm sure, very well-respected organisation, but it's a bit different. And so my point is, you've got to look at these things and you've got to ask yourself the question, why do we have these organisations? Why do we have these businesses? And see whether they pass the pub test. And frankly, some of them don't at this particular point. And the MIAB, I keep on hearing, but car insurance will go up. Why will it go up? The MIAB is quite a profitable thing. It seems to provide a return to the state. It continues to do that. I just don't get this logic. And the other thing I'd say, from a sale point of view, is you can use the levers you have in Parliament to regulate these businesses as well and to require particular community goods or community outcomes. I think they had it with Telstra for many years about the dividend that the community must receive as a result of that process.
Service level obligations.
Yeah, that's
all that
exactly
sort of
right.
thing, yeah.
So I just sort of make the point that you can do something. And again, I'm just saying you've got to look at these things. We can't afford to live the way we're living at the moment. We're living beyond our means.
I grant that these institutions are not serving the public in a way that we expect. But I think the question to ask is, why are these institutions in other states run in such a way? They're still in public hands, and they do serve the public. They are able to be run,
I spent a lot of time in Melbourne. That's not the public transport. There's not in public hands. For example,
no. So I'm thinking about TAFE here. People come from around the world to study at TAFEs in Melbourne, all sorts of subjects. So why, for example, are we not able to have that sort of leadership here?
Well, and I think,
no disrespect to generally, why don't we set a higher bar for how these institutions are run rather than just saying, well, we have to sell them?
Well, and perhaps that's the proposition, is we set the bar higher. I mean, the reality we've had during the TT line issue is there's been calls for the board to be sacked, right? They've reshuffled the board, but they haven't changed it. They're changing the CEO at some point. We'll have an appointment announcement. I mean, the reality is what these organisations are demonstrating, even when you reshuffle the deck chairs, there's not a hell of a lot of change. And I think that's where the community's frustration comes from, definitely the business community. But you're not wrong. You're not wrong in the sense we need to at least ask the question, why have we got it? How could it do better? What could we do to achieve it? That's for sure.
It'd be an interesting opinion poll on the public's view of privatisation. He said,
yes,
him knowingly.
Yes.
There you go. But I think it'll come back to that fundamental thing.
Are you talking about the Mercury's bodgy online polls?
No, we can do one of them. Mercury readers think about 3,500.
I think anti-privatisation might put up Kim Jong-un numbers on that one.
I reckon so.
Very possibly.
All right. Well,
it's got a whiff, hasn't it?
Definitely. Got to tell it to sell it, I think, would be the best advice in that sense. But anyhow, Brad, just quickly, what did you make of Labor's response?
Labor's response was on one level entirely predictable, but I think on another level they actually did walk into the trap that the government has been setting for them over the past few weeks, in fact, over the past few months, which has been Labor saying, budget's rooted, got to do something about it. So the Premier says, okay, how about we do a pay freeze? No. How about we have a dodge? No. How about we sell government assets? No. Yep. You're going to raise taxes then? Oh, no, I'm not going to do that either. So Labor's response is we're going to take the dividends from the GBEs as they are, and we're going to use the dividends to fix the budget. But the only way to fix the budget that way is to increase the dividends from the GBEs. And Mr Winter actually outlined that a couple of times in his speech. We're going to make the GBEs more profitable.
Or sell them.
No, but Mr Winter's approach is to make the GBEs more profitable, as announced. And by doing that, there's only two ways you can do that. Higher costs for the GBEs, higher charges, higher power prices, higher TT line fares, higher car regos. Or you can make the GBEs more efficient. Now, obviously, they're not going to do that because that's Labor. So he's left himself open to a counter-scare campaign, which actually makes the point. You're going to have... It weakens their own attack on the government because they've actually left the door open themselves. And so... I've always made the point, and I make the point again. Yes, you have to be negative in opposition. You have to tear the government down to win elections, but you've got to have a credible alternative. And at the moment, Labor has no credible alternative to fixing the budget. Zero, zip, nada.
Jack, what do you make of it?
Look, I mean, the Achilles heel for Social Democrats across the world is that they don't want to talk about revenue. That is the problem, and I understand why. Voters don't like to hear that they might be being taxed more. But talking about revenue doesn't just mean raising tax rates on people. It can mean growing the tax base. It can mean bringing more investment here, growing more businesses here, and having a bigger pie. It will probably require more people in this state. We need population growth, and to do that, we need to make housing a lot easier to build. Yep. We need to remove the red tape on housing. I'm very happy to hear that Rockcliffe is attacking red tape. I really look forward to the day when we can actually build an apartment building.
On bookshelves.
On bookshelves, right. There'll be bookshelves for everyone. Yeah, look, I mean, I think also you don't have to fix the government's problems from opposition. That's not necessarily your role. I think that there is a strong campaign to be run against privatisation that will resonate with the public, and Labor probably won't want to get sucked into having to talk about how they would run a budget in 4 years.
Okay.
But we're not in a 4-year cycle.
Why is that?
Well, because we're in a minority government where Mr Winter likes to beat his
Strong
chest
minority
and
government.
suggest he can bring the government down tomorrow. But if he doesn't have an alternative, he can't.
Yeah.
Well, I think he
actually
said
had
he's
a
not
chat
bringing the
with
government
him
down.
about that, and said, you know what, you could be premier on Friday, and there's no, I don't think there's any appetite for another election. That's the received wisdom. So I think Labor's settled into
30% in the polls. That's why.
Well, and Jack just made the point.
Cycle.
You know, there's going to be no confidence motion from Dean at any point soon. So
no,
that's
there's
worth
no.
noting. Yeah.
I think it's interesting about this too. We're about to head into a federal election, and we've got a Liberal Party, state Liberal Party down here talking about privatisation and cuts, which does align with some of Peter Dutton's talk around cuts to the Australian Public Service. But the privatisation thing is a little bit of a I mean, it's a little bit of a wild card, I think. Obviously, I don't think this election will turn on Tasmania. We're probably past that now. But still, I do think it's interesting that they've thrown this up right now.
Yeah. Dave, what do you make of it?
Look, I have to confess I didn't spend a great deal of time on it. You know, it's a set piece response to a set piece speech. Yep. Admittedly, this year it was a little more interesting than usual. You know, I mean, it's like a budget. It's like a budget reply. You know, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't.
Yeah.
They're not going to roll out their best policies. They're not going to. You know, it's here's a statement of our values. You know, I was probably more interested in talking to Dean Winter about, you know, what their plans are. And there's very clearly a disdain, and I think it spreads through all of the people presently in Parliament for the stunts of the previous Parliament. Anyone could have moved a no confidence motion this week on the off chance that, you know, but it's very clear that Labor's not going to support that. So, you know, he's made that abundantly apparent. So, you know, that's where my focus has been. Will the Parliament last the week? Who will be in charge? And you know, and very the very firmly fixed Rockcliffe agenda, and, you know, a new energetic premier, and some really good ideas to kick around. You know, you can't fault that. So yeah, I have to confess I didn't spend hours poring over Mr. Winter's every word.
There you go. You're more worried in the day-to-day. Will the Parliament make it through?
Will the government fall today, tomorrow? Will their legislation pass?
Yeah, okay. Well, look...
Just to round that out, Becher, sorry, before I move on, just on GBEs in general, and I think this is your view, in fact I know it's your view, and I know it's the view of a lot of people in Tasmania, particularly the business community, is that GBEs should not be making money. GBEs should be essentially not-for-profits. They should be aiming for break-even so that they can deliver the lowest possible service price to Tasmanians and the best possible service. So we shouldn't be... If you're talking about making GBEs more profitable and getting more and more dividends to prop up the budget bottom line, then you are using GBEs completely wrongly, or is that the right word? Completely the wrong way, and that is not the way that Tasmanians want them to be used.
Well, the hydro, I mean, we can go right down this rabbit hole. The hydro has been propping up the state budget for a number of years. The reality is, in terms of our tax base, we have a limited kind of area of tax. If you don't buy a house, if you don't gamble, right, and you don't own any land, there's probably not many areas in which, and you don't run a business that has a wage of more than 1.25 million a year, then you don't pay any taxes in Tasmania. So there's that whole issue. But I think that debate is probably, dare I say, for another day. But yes, I think gets back to my point about the GBEs. We've got to actually look at them and ask, what are we supposed to be doing with them? Are we supposed to be underwriting the state budget with the revenue from hydro, or are we supposed to be delivering cheap energy to attract industry, or what are we supposed to be doing? Or are we supposed to be driving the economy forward by using the hydro to develop renewable energy projects? I mean, there's all these options out there. That's exactly right. Anyhow, I think, just to round out my comments on Dean, the reality is opposition's opposed, and Dean knows GBE sales are a real stinker. What he can do with this is use it to highlight just the complete ineptitude that the government has of managing the state's finances. But yes, it's quite clear he's going to have to pay the piper at some point, and we're yet to see that. And as Brad points out, we are in a reasonably unstable political environment.
I know. Just make the point, the whole approach of not having an alternative budget or an alternative credible fiscal strategy for the past 11 years hasn't worked for Labor. So, maybe they should try something different. Just a radical thought.
All right, it's nearly time. Just two more matters, but one I want to quickly close out with, the sale of Southern Cross TV. So recently it was reported Southern Cross TV, and full disclosure, I used to work there many moons ago.
What did you do there, Beck?
Man, I was a political reporter many years ago. Must be, it's over 20 years.
Give us your best little...
Pardon?
I'm Becher Townshend.
I'm Becher Townshend from Canberra. Anyhow, that was a long time ago, and I wasn't in Canberra for very long. Has been sold to an outfit called Australian Digital Holdings, along with a few other regional stations, for the princely sum of $6.35 million. Just for context, when Southern Cross last sold, was in the late 80s, and I think it was $40 million. I can remember when I worked there, it was just about a licence to print money. Pre-aggregation it was. Post-aggregation it was starting to slide a bit, but Southern Cross was the thing to have, the jewel in the crown. So you can see what's happening to the value of TV stations. But what was interesting was, rather than reporting the news straight, our friends at the ABC and the Examiner...
Good friends.
Our good friends at the ABC and the Examiner, owned by ACM, Australian Community Media, cheered on by the various academics at the UTAS. Seems to be there's more and more academics
Maybe
at
they need a
UTAS.
dodge down there.
Perhaps they do. Instead of writing a story about how there are some new owners, really all we heard was that some Conservatives had bought this organisation, and that was therefore going to be bad for the media in Tasmania. Of course, as ever, Font got dragged into this one again because for some reason we seem to reduce the media diversity in Tasmania, particularly when we buy newspapers off Rupert Murdoch. And of course, our favourite Green Senator Nick McKim jumped in, and his better half Cassie also piled in. It's the same old story. Apparently, it's better that Southern Cross not exist than to be owned by anyone who might be politically right of centre. Don't know. You look as though you're about to fire up, Jack.
Who watches TV news? But I mean, it's an interesting choice to spend money to buy a TV station these days, I think. Interesting investment strategy. Probably not something that I would do, not that I have $6 million. But I think about it from a strategic point of view as someone who sits on the centre left broadly. I don't see any appetite in Australia for anyone on that side of the spectrum to invest in any kind of media ownership, whether it's traditional media. I'm not really seeing it in the digital space or the startup space, and I think that if a Conservative outfit buys Southern Cross, then my response to that is not that's wrong, or it's that the super funds or someone else or the union should have put together and bought it and turned it into something. That's my response to it. So I think it's bad for us on the Labor side. But, better that it doesn't fold and people don't lose their jobs, of course.
Better that we have a diverse media, I think. Dave, your editorial in the Mercury sort of captured some reasonably nice words about the fact that the ownership was changing in the sense
we want a vibrant and diverse media sector in Tasmania. I mean, I think I reported in much the same terms as the ABC did. They're clearly a Conservative outfit. I think Jason Morrison is involved with it. I used to knock around with him in Sydney 20 years ago, chasing crime gangs around, 30 years ago, chasing crime gangs around Cabramatta during a heroin epidemic.
There's a podcast in that.
Absolutely great fun.
Names, dates, places.
Yeah,
Dave.
so, I guess with all things, to me, you can apply labels to things, but the proof of the pudding's in the eating. Let's see how they go.
Yep.
They might turn this into, obviously not going to come up to quite to the standards of the Mercury now. A booming website and our social media presence, but good luck to them. They can have a go. We want as many voices as we can have. We want them on all sides of the debate. It's to our benefit that ideas are scrutinised, ridiculed, lampooned, boosted, whatever. So best of luck to them. I live long and prosper. I think the current trajectory of the media industry is one that might suggest it's a very brave. They're very brave.
Very brave. Courageous decision, perhaps. Anyhow, listen, one last thing. I'm just going to mention a few names to you. Hodgman, Groom, Hiskett. What have they all got in common, Tassie?
Family dynasties.
Family dynasties. Well, as we know this week, there's another dynasty joining, Farrell. There you go. So just a bit of a shout-out to Casey Farrell, who's joint parliament, who's got in on Beck White's recount. Casey, the son of Craig Farrell, very affable president of the Legislative Council. Welcome to you, Casey. Great to see some new blood here. He's got big shoes to fill in the sense that Rebecca was one of the hardest working members of Lions, I've got to say. So I hope he brings some new energy and some new thought into the house.
And Casey has a background with Enterprise Tasmania too in the startup space. I think it's a good new perspective to bring to the Parliament.
Okay,
I've got one more. But
one more.
A little tidbit too. It's trivial.
Couple before we drop out.
Absolutely. Look, for the tragics, I highly recommend getting down to Parliament House and having a look at the new portrait of Peter Gutwin that has appeared at the top of the stairs.
Is he wearing a shirt?
Yeah, he's got a suit on, got his trademark tie. It's quite a striking. We've been lucky with portraits of past premiers in recent times. I really like the Will Hodgman portrait, the David Bartlett one's pretty good too. Lara Giddings, they move around. You come up the stairs and you go, oh, there's a new one. It's
like Hogwarts.
We go through premiers. That's our growth industry is portrait painting in Tasmania. But if you're hanging around Parliament House, get up onto the.
Did it have
just outside the house?
Have sort of slashes in the background?
It's got a very striking red slashes over his left shoulder.
And I think that's sort of to signify COVID.
I interpreted it as COVID. I went, that's COVID.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right.
Might be worth
expecting an unveiling.
Well, it might be worth a story on it in the paper, Dave, or even us banging it up on some socials.
Well, it's interesting. Normally there is big grand unveilings for these things.
I think it's pending.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right. Yeah, there you go.
Just one last from me, Beach. We picked this up a couple of weeks ago. The new chair of Tourism North Tasmania.
Yeah.
They're called Tourism North. That's what they're called.
Tourism North.
They've managed to pick up an individual who has got a very strong record of backing the tourism sector in northern Tasmania.
Hope so.
Delivering for the tourism sector.
It's in the ad.
Yeah. So I understand that the new appointee is Mr. Anthony Donald, the current CEO of Tasports, who haven't built a wharf for the two TT line vessels to tie up at and support Tasmania's tourism industry. So it does seem like a slightly perplexing appointment. But anyway, there you go. Good luck to him.
No one ever starves in this joint.
Yeah, I think I think as Jeremy Clarkson would say on that bombshell, I think it's time. We had been planning a weekly series during the election campaign from next Friday, but it looks like Mother Nature may well have intervened for now. FontCast is brought to you by Enterprise Marketing and Research Services, Tasmania's leading and trusted research provider. Thank you, Brad.
Great to be here.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you.
And thank you, David.
It's been great.
Don't forget you can now catch us on our new YouTube channel, FontCast. FontCast is produced and directed by Sam Eichen from Eichen Media. And until next time, carry on.